Dear viewers, welcome back to the conclusion of a story that will shake you to your core. If you missed part 1, go watch it right now, because what I'm about to reveal will only make sense if you know how we got here. Last time, we left Grace Williams holding a manila envelope that would change everything she thought she knew about her life. She had just made a promise to a dying millionaire, not knowing that promise would uncover secrets buried for over 4 decades. Today, we discover what happened when she opened that envelope and learned the shocking truth about her own family. Stay with me until the very end, because this story takes turns you'll never see coming. And if you're ready for part 2, comment where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our incredible true stories. Let's dive in. The morning after Richard Ashford passed away, Grace sat alone in her small apartment kitchen, staring at the unopened envelope. Her children had already left for school, and the silence felt heavier than usual. She had called in sick to her other cleaning jobs, something she never did, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind couldn't focus on anything except that promise. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the worn wooden table where she helped her kids with homework every night. The envelope seemed to weigh nothing and everything all at once. Ashford's final words echoed in her memory. Promise me you'll see it through, no matter what anyone else says, no matter how difficult it gets. Grace took a deep breath and carefully tore open the seal. The first thing she saw was a letter written in Mr. Ashford's neat handwriting. Her name was written at the top in elegant script, and as she began to read, the world around her started spinning. My dear Grace, if you are reading this, then I have passed away, and you are about to discover something that will change your life forever. She read the next paragraph 3 times before it truly sank in. 42 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I fell in love with a beautiful woman named Sarah Williams, but I was too concerned with what my family would think. Sarah was pregnant with my child when I abandoned her. Grace's coffee cup slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor and sending hot liquid everywhere. Williams, that was her last name. That was her mother's name. Her mother who had died when Grace was 25, taking all her secrets with her. The letter continued, each word hitting her like a physical blow. That child was your mother, Grace. You are my granddaughter. You have been caring for me, showing me love and respect that I never deserved, and I have been too ashamed to tell you the truth. Grace stood up so fast, her chair fell backward. She paced around her tiny kitchen, stepping over the broken coffee cup, trying to process what she had just read. Mr. Ashford wasn't just her employer, he was her grandfather, the man who had abandoned her grandmother decades ago, leaving her to raise a child alone in a world that wasn't kind to unmarried black women. She thought about her mother, Sarah, who had worked 3 jobs to support them. Her mother who had refused to talk about Grace's grandfather, who would change the subject whenever Grace asked questions about her father's side of the family. Now she understood the pain in her mother's eyes whenever those questions came up. With trembling hands, Grace picked up the letter and continued reading. The words became more impossible with each sentence. In this envelope, you will find my last will and testament. I have left everything to you, the house, the money, the investments, everything. Grace nearly collapsed. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself as she read about trust funds, property deeds, and bank accounts with numbers that seemed like they belonged in movies, not in her real life. She was looking at more money than she had ever imagined existing in one place, but there were conditions attached to this inheritance that made her stomach twist with anxiety. My first condition is that you must find your grandmother, Sarah. She is still alive, living in a nursing home in Memphis. I have been paying for her care anonymously for the past 15 years, but she doesn't know it's from me. I want you to tell her that I never stopped loving her and that I am sorry for being such a fool. Grace's grandmother was alive. The woman she had been told died when Grace was a baby was not only living, but had been cared for by the very man who had abandoned her all those years ago. The complexity of emotions washing over her was overwhelming. Anger, confusion, hope, and heartbreak all crashed together in her chest. The second condition made her feel sick. You must reveal the truth about our family to Marcus and Patricia. They need to know they have a sister, and they need to know what kind of man their father really was. This will not be easy, Grace. They will be angry. They will fight you, but the money is yours by right. She knew Marcus and Patricia. Marcus visited once a month, always in his expensive suits, always checking his phone, treating Grace like she was invisible. Patricia called from California every Sunday, their conversations short and formal. How was she supposed to tell them that their father had a secret family? How was she supposed to explain that she was their sister? The final condition was the most overwhelming of all. I want you to use this money to help other people the way you helped me. Start a foundation, build schools, support single mothers like yourself. Show the world what real kindness looks like. Grace sat down on the floor of her kitchen, surrounded by the scattered papers and broken pieces of her coffee cup. She was a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. She had never managed anything bigger than her own household budget. How was she supposed to run a foundation? How was she supposed to handle millions of dollars responsibly? The letter ended with a phone number and instructions to call attorney James Patterson, who would help her through the legal process. Grace stared at that phone number for 20 minutes before she found the courage to dial it. The law office was intimidating in a way that made Grace feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, and oil paintings worth more than her annual salary lined the walls. She sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car, clutching her purse and trying not to touch anything. James Patterson was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. He treated Grace with a respect she wasn't used to receiving in places like this. "Miss Williams," he began, his voice gentle but professional. "Mr. Ashford spoke of you often during our meetings. He had tremendous respect for you and was very specific about his wishes regarding this inheritance." Grace found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Is this really legal? Can he just leave everything to someone who isn't his child?" Mr. Patterson smiled. "Not only is it legal, but Mr. Ashford took extraordinary measures to ensure this will cannot be easily contested. He had DNA testing done, extensive documentation of your family connection, and multiple psychiatric evaluations to prove he was of sound mind when making these decisions. He spread several documents across the mahogany table. The estate is valued at approximately $47 million. This includes the mansion, investment portfolios, business holdings, and liquid assets. There are also specific trust funds established for your children's education and future needs." Grace felt dizzy looking at the numbers on the pages. This couldn't be real. People like her didn't inherit $47 million. There had to be some mistake. Mr. Patterson continued, his tone becoming more serious. "However, you should know that Mr. Ashford's biological children will likely contest this will. They don't know about your relationship to their father yet, and when they find out, there will be significant legal challenges ahead." "What happens if they fight it?" Grace asked. "We fight back," he replied firmly. Mr. Ashford anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. "The documentation is ironclad, and your legal claim to this inheritance is solid. But I won't lie to you, Miss Williams. This will be difficult. The Ashford family has resources and connections that will make this a very public and very messy battle." Grace thought about her children, about the quiet life they had built together. Once this news broke, that privacy would be gone forever. Her kids would be thrust into a spotlight they never asked for, and she would become the target of scrutiny from people who would never understand her story. But she had made a promise to a dying man, a promise to honor his final wish, no matter how difficult it became. "What do I need to do?" she asked, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Mr. Patterson smiled, and she could see approval in his eyes. "First, we need to prepare you for the reading of the will. Mr. Ashford's children have been notified and will be here tomorrow morning. That's when they'll learn about your existence and your inheritance." Grace's heart started racing. Tomorrow morning, her entire world would change. Tomorrow morning, she would have to look Marcus and Patricia in the eye and tell them that everything they thought they knew about their father was wrong. "Are you ready for this, Miss Williams?" Mr. Patterson asked gently. Grace thought about her grandmother in Memphis, about the foundation Mr. Ashford wanted her to create, about the promise she had made. She thought about her mother, who had struggled so hard to give Grace a better life. never knowing that help was just a secret away. "I made a promise," she said quietly. "I intend to keep it." The next morning, Grace arrived at the law office wearing the only dress she owned that seemed appropriate for such an occasion. It was navy blue, simple, and she had bought it for her mother's funeral years ago. She never imagined she would wear it to discover she was an heiress. Her hands trembled as she walked through the marble lobby, past the same crystal chandeliers that had intimidated her the day before. Today, they seemed to mock her with their brilliance, as if they knew she didn't belong in a world of such luxury. Mr. Patterson met her at the elevator, his expression serious but reassuring. "Miss Williams, are you ready for this? Remember, no matter what happens in that room, no matter how they react, you have every legal right to be here." Grace nodded, though her stomach felt like it was full of stones. Through the glass doors of the conference room, she could see Marcus and Patricia Ashford already seated at the long table. Marcus wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 3 months. Patricia was dressed in black, her blonde hair pulled back severely, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on the table. They looked up when Grace entered, their expressions shifting from mild curiosity to confusion. Marcus glanced at Mr. Patterson with raised eyebrows. "James, who is this? We're here for a private family matter." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat, gesturing for Grace to take a seat across from the siblings. "This is Grace Williams. She's here because she has a direct interest in your father's estate." Patricia's voice was sharp with irritation. "I don't understand. Is she some kind of creditor? Did my father owe her money?" Grace felt heat rising in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to run from this room full of expensive furniture and expensive people who looked at her like she was an intruder. But she remembered Mr. Ashford's letter, his final wish, and she forced herself to stay seated. Mr. Patterson opened his briefcase and removed several documents. "Before we proceed with the reading of the will, there are some facts about your father that you need to understand. Facts that will explain Miss Williams's presence here today." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Facts? What kind of facts?" The attorney's voice was measured and professional. 42 years ago, your father had a relationship with a woman named Sarah Williams. This relationship resulted in the birth of a daughter. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's face went pale, and Marcus sat forward in his chair, his expression darkening. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered. "Our father would never have kept something like that from us." Mr. Patterson placed a DNA test report on the table. "I'm afraid the evidence is quite conclusive. Sarah Williams was Grace's mother. Grace is your father's granddaughter, which makes her your niece. Legally and biologically, she is family." Marcus grabbed the report, his eyes scanning the scientific data that proved what Grace herself was still struggling to accept. "This is ridiculous. Even if this woman is somehow related to us, that doesn't give her any claim to our father's estate." Grace found her voice, though it came out quieter than she intended. "I didn't know. I didn't know who I was to him until yesterday." Patricia's laugh was cold and bitter. "Oh, how convenient. The maid suddenly discovers she's related to the millionaire right after he dies." "I never asked for any of this," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "I was just doing my job, taking care of him because he was kind to me." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. You're telling me that for 3 years, our father had his secret granddaughter cleaning his house, and he never said a word?" Mr. Patterson consulted his notes. "According to your father's letter, he discovered Grace's identity about 6 months ago. He had been suspicious for some time due to the resemblance in her last name, so he arranged for DNA testing without her knowledge." "How?" Grace asked. "When did you get my DNA?" "The coffee cup you broke in his kitchen," Mr. Patterson explained gently. "He saved a piece and had it tested. When the results confirmed his suspicions, he began planning this inheritance." Patricia was shaking her head repeatedly. No, this is wrong. Our father was a good man. He wouldn't have abandoned a pregnant woman. He wouldn't have kept secrets like this." Grace thought about her mother's sadness, about the questions that were never answered, about the struggle of growing up without knowing half of her family history. "He did abandon her. My grandmother Sarah. She raised my mother alone, and my mother raised me alone. Your father left them with nothing." The room fell silent again. Marcus returned to his seat, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. Even if this story is true, it doesn't explain why he would leave everything to you instead of his actual children. Mr. Patterson opened another folder. Perhaps the reading of the will itself will provide that explanation. He cleared his throat and began reading in his formal attorney voice. I, Richard James Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate to my granddaughter, Grace Williams, with the following conditions and stipulations. Patricia gasped audibly. Marcus's hands clenched into fists on the table. The attorney continued. To my son Marcus and my daughter Patricia, I leave each of you $100,000. This is not because I love you less, but because you have already received the benefits of my wealth throughout your lives. Grace has received nothing, and neither did her mother or grandmother. Everything else? Marcus's voice was barely controlled. The house, the investments, the business holdings, all of it goes to Grace, subject to 3 specific conditions outlined by your father. Grace felt the weight of their stares, the heat of their anger directed at her like physical force. She had expected this reaction, but experiencing it was far worse than she had imagined. Mr. Patterson read the first condition. Grace must locate her grandmother, Sarah Williams, and deliver a message of love and apology from your father. She must tell Sarah that he never stopped loving her, and that he spent his life regretting his cowardice. The second condition. Grace must establish the Sarah Williams Foundation for Single Mothers, using the majority of the inheritance to provide education, job training, and support for women in situations similar to what her grandmother faced. And the third condition? Patricia asked, her voice hollow. Grace must reveal the truth about your family connection to both of you, which we are doing now. Your father wanted his children to know they had a sister, even if that knowledge came after his death. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sister? She's not our sister. She's some woman who figured out how to manipulate a guilty old man. Half-sister, Grace corrected quietly. And I never manipulated anyone. I didn't even know we were related until yesterday. Patricia was studying the legal documents with sharp eyes. This is fraud. It has to be. No one gives away $47 million to their housekeeper out of guilt. Your father did, Mr. Patterson said firmly, and he took every legal precaution to ensure this will would stand up in court. Multiple witnesses, psychiatric evaluations, extensive documentation. He knew you would contest it, and he prepared for that eventuality. Grace watched as the reality settled over the siblings. Their comfortable world of inherited wealth and social status was crumbling around them. She almost felt sorry for them, until she remembered her mother working 3 jobs, her grandmother abandoned and pregnant, decades of struggle that could have been prevented. There's more, Mr. Patterson continued. Your father has also established trust funds for Grace's children, ensuring their education through college and beyond. He considered them his great-grandchildren and wanted to provide for their future. Marcus stood up again, this time walking toward the door. I've heard enough. Patricia, we're leaving. We're going to contest this will with every resource we have. Patricia gathered her purse, her movements sharp with anger. Grace, I don't know what kind of lies you told our father, but you won't get away with this. We'll see you in court. Grace remained seated as the siblings stormed out, their expensive shoes clicking angrily on the marble floor. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt both relieving and terrifying. Mr. Patterson organized his papers calmly. That went about as well as expected. Are you prepared for what comes next, Miss Williams? Grace thought about the long legal battle ahead, about the media attention that would surely follow, about explaining all of this to her children. She thought about her grandmother waiting in a nursing home in Memphis, not knowing that the man who had broken her heart was finally trying to make amends. What happens now? She asked. Now we prepare for war, Mr. Patterson replied. But first, I think you should visit your grandmother. Your father's first condition was the most important to him. Everything else can wait until you've delivered his message. Grace nodded, understanding that this journey was just beginning. She had inherited more than money. She had inherited a mission to heal old wounds, to right historical wrongs, and to build something meaningful from the ashes of her family's broken past. But first, she had to face the woman whose life had been shattered by the same man who was now trying to rebuild it through his granddaughter's hands. Grace sat in her car outside the Magnolia Care Center in Memphis, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The 3-hour drive from her apartment had given her time to think, but now that she was here, facing the brick building where her grandmother lived, every coherent thought seemed to abandon her. She had called ahead, speaking to a nurse named Betty who had cared for Sarah Williams for the past 5 years. "Miss Sarah is 91 now," Betty had explained in her warm southern accent. "She has good days and bad days, but her mind is still sharp most of the time. She talks about her daughter sometimes, about Grace. She'll be so happy to see you." Grace had almost hung up the phone when Betty mentioned that her grandmother talked about her. All these years, she had believed her grandmother was dead, while Sarah had been living just 3 hours away, wondering what had happened to the granddaughter she had never gotten to know. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and flowers, a combination that reminded Grace of hospitals but somehow felt warmer. Betty met her at the front desk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Your grandmother is in the sunroom," Betty said, leading Grace down a hallway lined with cheerful paintings. "She spends most afternoons there, reading or watching the birds at the feeder outside the window. She's going to be shocked to see you, honey. We told her she had a visitor, but we didn't say who." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached a bright room filled with comfortable chairs and large windows. Several elderly residents sat reading newspapers or dozing in the afternoon sunlight. Betty pointed to a corner chair where a small woman sat with a book in her lap, her silver hair styled neatly around a face that looked remarkably like Grace's mother. "Miss Sarah," Betty called gently, "your visitor is here." The elderly woman looked up, and Grace felt the world stop spinning. Even at 91, Sarah Williams had the same intelligent eyes that Grace remembered from old photographs of her mother. Those eyes widened as they took in Grace's face, recognition dawning slowly. "My lord," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You look just like my daughter, just like my Sarah." Grace walked slowly across the room, her legs feeling unsteady. "Grandmother," she said softly, "it's me, it's Grace." Sarah's book slipped from her hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. She reached out with shaking fingers, touching Grace's face as if she couldn't believe she was real. "My grandbaby, my sweet grandbaby. I thought I'd never see you again." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as she knelt beside her grandmother's chair. "I thought you were dead. Mama told me you died when I was little." Sarah's eyes filled with pain and understanding. "Your mama was protecting you, child, protecting you from the truth about what happened, about why we had to disappear from your life." Grace took her grandmother's weathered hands in hers. "Tell me what happened. Tell me about Richard Ashford." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, decades of pain washing over her face. "How do you know that name, baby? How do you know about Richard?" Grace looked around the sunroom, making sure they had privacy. "I need to tell you something, grandmother. Something that's going to be hard to hear. Richard Ashford died 3 days ago, and before he died, he asked me to find you. He asked me to tell you something." Sarah's breathing became rapid and shallow. "Richard is dead? After all these years, he's finally gone?" "Yes, but grandmother, there's more. I've been working for him. For the past 3 years, I've been cleaning his house. I didn't know who he was to us until after he died." Sarah stared at Grace with a mixture of disbelief and something that looked like betrayal. "You worked for him? You worked for the man who destroyed our family?" "I didn't know," Grace said quickly. "I had no idea he was connected to us. He never told me, never gave any sign that he knew who I was, but he did know. He's known for months." Sarah pulled her hands away, her expression hardening. What did he want? What message could that man possibly have for me after 42 years of silence? Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "He wanted me to tell you that he never stopped loving you, that he's sorry for being a coward, that abandoning you was the biggest mistake of his life." Sarah laughed, but it was a sound full of bitterness. "Love? He loved me so much that he threw money at me and told me to disappear when I told him I was carrying his child. He loved me so much that he let me struggle alone. Let your mama grow up without a father. Let you grow up without knowing your grandfather." Grace felt her grandmother's pain like a knife in her chest. He was wrong. What he did was terrible. But he's been paying for your care here for 15 years. He's been taking care of you, even though you didn't know it. Sarah's anger faltered, confusion taking its place. What are you talking about? This place, your medical care, everything. He's been paying for it all. Anonymous donations that covered every expense. He never stopped watching over you, grandmother. He just didn't have the courage to face you. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 15 years? He's been paying for 15 years? Grace nodded, and there's more. He left me everything in his will. The house, the money, all of it. But he wants me to use it to help other single mothers. Women like you who were abandoned and had to raise children alone. Sarah's eyes widened. He left you everything? What about his other children? They got some money, but most of it came to me. He said it was because his family owed a debt to ours, a debt that could never really be repaid, but that he wanted to try. Sarah leaned back in her chair, looking suddenly frail and overwhelmed. All these years, I hated that man. I taught your mother to hate him too. I told her never to look for him, never to try to contact his family. I thought he had forgotten us completely. Grace reached for her grandmother's hands again. He never forgot you. His letter said that losing you was the worst mistake of his life, that he thought about you every day. Tears began streaming down Sarah's weathered cheeks. I loved him so much, baby. When I was young, I thought we would find a way to be together despite everything. The world was different then, harder for people like us, but I believed love could conquer anything. What happened? Grace asked gently. Tell me the real story. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue from the table beside her chair. I was working as a seamstress in his mother's dress shop. Richard would come in sometimes to pick up alterations for his sisters. He was handsome, charming, and he treated me like I mattered, not like hired help, but like a woman worth knowing. She paused, lost in memories from decades ago. We started meeting in secret. He would take me to quiet places where we could talk without being seen. He told me about his dreams, his fears, his plans for the future. I told him about my hopes of opening my own dress shop someday, maybe teaching other women to sew. Grace listened intently, hungry for details about a love story that had shaped her entire family's destiny. When I found out I was pregnant, Sarah continued, I was scared, but happy. I thought Richard would be happy too. I thought we would find a way to make it work, even if it meant leaving Tennessee, starting over somewhere else. But he wasn't happy, Grace said quietly. Sarah's face crumpled with old pain. He was terrified. His family had money, status, connections. They had already arranged a marriage for him with a girl from a wealthy white family. When I told him about the baby, he looked at me like I had just destroyed his entire future. Grace felt anger building in her chest. What did he do? He gave me $5,000 and told me to go away. Said he would ruin both our lives if anyone found out about us. He said the money was enough to start over somewhere else, to raise the baby alone. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. $5,000 to abandon the woman he claimed to love and the child she was carrying. Grace thought about the $47 million she had inherited, about the mansion she now owned, about the privilege and comfort Richard Ashford had enjoyed while her grandmother struggled in poverty. So you left, Grace said. I took that money and moved to Chicago. I was 19 years old, pregnant, and alone in a city where I knew nobody. I found work in a factory, saved every penny I could. When your mother was born, I worked double shifts just to afford a babysitter. Grace thought about her mother, growing up without knowing her father's name, without understanding why her mother always looked sad when other children talked about their daddies. Mama never knew the truth, did she? Sarah shook her head, fresh tears falling. I told her that her father was a good man who couldn't be with us. I never wanted her to carry the burden of knowing she was unwanted by someone who should have loved her. When she got older and asked more questions, I would change the subject or leave the room. The pain was too much. Grace squeezed her grandmother's hands tighter. She knew something was missing. She used to ask me about you, about family she'd never met. I think she always felt like there was more to the story. There was always more to the story, baby. But some stories are too painful to tell, even to the people we love most. Grace took a deep breath, knowing she had to share the hardest part of Richard's message. Grandmother, he wanted you to know something else. He said that if he could go back and change everything, he would choose you. He would choose love over fear, family over status. He said the life he built without you felt empty, no matter how successful he became. Sarah closed her eyes, decades of anger and hurt warring with something that might have been forgiveness. It's too late for pretty words, Grace. Too late for apologies that can't change the past. But maybe it's not too late for healing, Grace said softly. Maybe it's not too late for our family to be whole again. Sarah opened her eyes, studying her granddaughter's face. What do you mean? I'm going to honor his wishes. I'm going to use his money to help women like you, women who were abandoned and had to fight alone. The Sarah Williams Foundation is going to make sure no mother has to choose between working and caring for her children. No child has to grow up wondering why their father didn't want them. Sarah's expression softened. You want to name it after me? After you and Mama both. The women who raised strong daughters despite everything that was taken from them. The women who survived when the world tried to break them. For the first time since Grace had arrived, Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, fragile but real. Your mama would be proud of you, baby. So proud to see the woman you've become. Grace felt a weight lifting from her chest, a burden she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. I wish she was here to see this. I wish she could know that her father finally tried to make things right. She knows, honey. Wherever she is, she knows. They sat together in the sunroom as the afternoon light faded. 3 generations of women connected by love, loss, and the complicated legacy of a man who had spent his life trying to atone for one terrible decision. Grace told her grandmother about her children, about the trust funds that would ensure they never struggled the way their family had. Sarah shared stories about Grace's mother as a little girl, memories that filled in gaps Grace had never known existed. When visiting hours ended, Grace kissed her grandmother goodbye, promising to return soon with her children. As she drove back toward home, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere, to someone, to a story bigger than herself. The legal battles with Marcus and Patricia would continue. The media attention would be overwhelming. The responsibility of managing millions of dollars and starting a foundation would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. But Grace Williams was no longer just a maid who cleaned other people's houses. She was the keeper of her family's story, the bridge between past pain and future healing, the woman chosen to transform one man's guilt into lasting change for countless others. Richard Ashford's last wish had been fulfilled, but Grace's real work was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready for whatever came next. Grace's story proves that sometimes the most powerful inheritances aren't money or property, but the courage to heal old wounds and build something beautiful from broken pieces. Her journey from maid to millionaire wasn't just about wealth. It was about discovering that family, forgiveness, and purpose can transform even the deepest pain into hope. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments how Grace's strength inspired you.